One of the people I really admire and respect is Ingo Swann. Now, he's deceased, and I like the way he starts one of his presentations with, "Were you born after 1965? Then you probably don't know who I am." And you need to know if you have never heard of Ingo. He is referred to as the man who started remote viewing. In one of the videos, which I will link in the description, he gives you a presentation about himself, answers questions, and also addresses the ET factor, okay, or the ET element. Before that, we're going to listen to Elly because Elly has some information in terms of all the people who are now trying to contact ET. And does that relate to remote viewing?
And the people who are promoting contact with remote viewing are not talking about this at all. And if somebody says, hey, I had a bad experience, they're sort of like, they're marginalized. I don't think that's right. And I think it should be talked about.
Elly Flippen, Ingo's niece, who manages the estate of Ingo Swann. Website, ingoswann.com.
Stay on track and understand. So my post today, which is really fascinating, is if you're doing this, you have just joined a UFO religion. Because a UFO religion is a group of people who are out there trying to contact extraterrestrials or other beings. And you're not remote viewing. You need to know what you signed up for.
Elly Flippen is Ingo's niece. We've talked before. I wanted to talk with her again because of this new page on Ingo's website. I am so glad to see this. It's about time we started dealing with this kind of presence. The page is Non-Human Entities. What prompted you to add this specific element to Ingo's page?
Something is happening in the remote viewing world where there's this sense of contacting. Hey, there are these aliens or extraterrestrials or higher intelligence, these non-human entities or beings, and they're like friendly and they're enlightened influences on our lives, which, probably could be true, but it could also be a disguise. And because that's sort of like the in thing now with remote viewing, and it's not necessarily just on the fringe. I mean, there's some very mainstream remote viewers who are all in on contact. And people are saying they're using remote viewing to interact, to communicate with these beings. Ingo himself actually commented on this over 30 years ago. And he said, hey, remote viewing is a set of protocols. It's a way for us to access information that's shielded from us, that's at a place and a time that's distant from us. But now people are saying, hey, it's remote viewing when we're contacting these beings and we're communicating with these beings. And that's where it crosses into the line of like mediumship or channeling. And if a group is encouraging somebody to communicate with these higher intelligences, there's a name for that. It's not new. It's been around since Roswell. Even before that, even going back to the time of the early occultists, or UFO religion or contactee cult. I think that people sort of kind of need to know what they're getting into if they start getting involved with this, because there can be some very dangerous interactions. And, John Keel is a very close friend with Ingo. He's the one that coined the term ultra-terrestrials, and he identified himself as a demonologist. And he said, these things are dangerous, these things are dark, and if you're not prepared and you're just going in there blindly, it's quite possible that you could bring something back with you. Because when you're in this state, the sort of mediumistic state, and you're traversing the psychic highway or what have you, it's very easy for these beings to hijack you. And then you come back and now you have a huge problem on your hands. And I think that's the sort of dirty little secret about this that no one's talking about. And if you talk about it and you talk about, hey, I had a really bad experience, I'm very depressed, all of a sudden I feel like very angry. Because of these experiences, you're sort of drowned out, you're cast out, you're blocked. It's like nobody wants to hear that. And I wonder if that's an agenda too.
Yeah, because the more people who are doing this, the more people you can study. Okay, so there's a larger science pool to draw from if you just say, okay, yeah, go full boat and full throttle, and then we'll find out who's the most interesting of the bunch and study them.
Right, and you have to think, so Ingo he developed these protocols he called controlled remote viewing, but he was also a psychic in the terms that some people might also think as like a medium or a channeler. I mean, he talks about channeling, for instance, the books Master of Harmlessness and for Fables. So he spent most of his adult life studying occult and ancient texts and ancient religions. He was thorough studier of all things of a hidden nature or other knowledge or mystery schools. Even studying at Ralph Steiner's Center and Alice Bailey's Arcane School. I found this interesting quote. It's in a book by Kevin Dunn. It's called Enchanted New York, A Journey Along Broadway Through Manhattan's Past. And he calls what Ingo is doing obsession. And he makes note of John Keel and Ingo, and he says, they've kind of learned how to navigate this realm and how to navigate these beings. And, like that, he said, quote, trafficking with these beings on the psychic plane, where they don't succumb to a full demonic possession. I mean, he really calls it out, says these beings are demonic, consequently experiencing psychosis, suicide, or death. But Ingo is able to sort of maintain a distance from this being obsession mode instead of possession mode. And yet, you see him at the very end of his life undertake these kind of sessions where he says he's going to the moon and planets, and I actually think he's just going interdimensionally. And he picks up hitchhikers along the way. And in fact, he says he's contacting a special group, and he literally says, "Oh, aren't they sweet?" And then within weeks, he's dealing with an onslaught of psychic attacks that are affecting him mentally and physically. And so they hear somebody who studied at master schools and studied mediumship, and even he is being attacked and having to deal with the situation.
I think that's part of the problem. When you're talking about the indigenous cultures who have dealt with this kind of stuff for most likely centuries, and we're just now new to the playing field, the arena, and there's already this element that pretty well knows every single thing about humans and knows our weaknesses. Ego is one. And then the other fact that when we get seduced into a playing field where we get some of our needs met, then there is that obsession to go back and repeat the experience, and we get into a pattern. And we're so gullible and vulnerable to some of this without understanding the need for protection and what protection actually is. And for somebody like Ingo to have been caught up in that says a lot. To know that he was so incredibly educated, experienced, and astute, and yet this doesn't prevent you from being vulnerable because these entities already know us. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And interestingly, like the indigenous people, it's sort of, if we have a moment, I could share two stories with you.
Yeah.
So it was the 1990s. And at the time, Sandy Wright, who was a wonderful human being, she was one of the founders of the Friends of Ions. And she was such a believer in all these kind of phenomena that were happening. She often brought people to meet, the great Ingo Swann. And in this particular time, she brought a shaman and then a group of individuals. And what they were going to do is use Ingo's basement studio to film a healing ceremony, not so that the shaman was going to do an actual healing ceremony, but replicate one. And so down they came. You have to understand this, the Ingo studio basement is about 3/4 underground. So a quarter of it sort of above ground. So you have to get into 357, you go upstairs, and then the basement, you go downstairs. So there at the front of the basement, which faced the Bowery, was a set of doors that are always locked and closed. And then the doorway to the basement was a heavy metal door. And then in the very back was Ingo's sort of bedroom and then laundry room, and a window back there where he put his air conditioner into the window and then glued up. And I think there may even have been a window that was glued shut in the laundry room. And keeping in mind that these are like barely, I think, above the ground level, if you will, these windows. But they're complete shut. So it's the only thing in there. So the film crew sets up with Sandy, and they're in a sort of lounge area in Ingo's studio, and it's sort of buttressed by sofas and seats. And I take a seat which is sort of closer to what would be the Bowery side of the studio, which was his training table. But it was my job to go and shut the door up at the top of the stairs leading down to the basement when everything got ready, because it needed to be completely dark except for the camera, which was going to put a light on and film the shaman. So everything was ready. I went and shut the door and closed it, and it's super heavy. It's a metal door. But I shut it. I didn't lock. And I came back down. As soon as I was down, they turned out the light, and the light on the camera came in. And to understand, there's probably literally one outlet. I don't even think it's in the basement. I think it was on Ingo's fourth floor, and everything was an extension cord off of that to an outlet to another extension, right? So we're not dealing like with the and it's trailing down the elevator shaft from the fourth floor. But that's what they have plugged into. So the shaman starts, and in the moment that he starts, it's pitch black except for this tiny little light on the camera. A huge gust of wind comes from the back, Ingo's bedroom area, and blows. And as it blows, it knocks out the camera, knocks out the cameraman, goes past me, goes up the stairs, and throws open the door. And, the camera people are issuing a lot of choice words because their camera equipment is shot, completely shot. And Ingo kind of looks over at me, and I look over at him because there's just no conceivable way a wind gust could come from the back and blow in. It's just, there's no means of access. And then the door to go open. But, he doesn't want to freak everybody out. And so they start, and I think, somebody may have tried to record it another way. This is before cell phones. They may have bought some sort of other recording device with them. I'm not really sure. Again, it was pitch black. I had to go up and close the door, but I had to find my way back down the stairs in darkness because we couldn't get any lights on. And then the shaman finishes. While he's doing his ceremony, because I'm at Ingo's training table, he's got pens and paper there. And so I kind of draw out, I had an image of like a fishbone shape. And then I had an image of like a stick figure with their hands holding up. So I drew both of those. And once everybody was sort of done speaking to the shaman, like I had to get the door back open, and there were some lights. And then eventually the lights came back on. And Ingo opened a lot of wine, and everybody was drinking. I'm sure Ingo more than anybody drinking anything, because what the heck just happened? Right. So finally, like, I could get to the shaman, and I say, and it's really interesting because a lot of the people who were there were like throwing out words like, "Oh, we saw rainbows," and I'm pretty sure the word unicorn was tossed out.
They're all there.
Like, they're all there, and I'm like, "Oh, this is what the shaman's contending with." And I think he's sort of like on a fundraising thing too. So he's kind of plagued with these people. And I show him my thing. I go, "This is what I saw," and he pulls me over. And he said I had used like sticks and wood and stone and material to make an image that was part of my ceremony. And he showed it to me, and it was the fishbone shape. It was the same exact shape. So I think I had picked that up. And then I showed him my other thing. He goes, "Oh, I have a picture of that. It's a pictograph." And he shows me, and he's like, "I brought a book, pictograph book," and he shows me, because that's a healer, which I think he was saying that's like a shaman. This is really interesting because at that time, I'm standing with him next to Ingo's bookshelf, and Ingo's got a lot of like art books, it's near where his painting station is, and a lot of them are like Native American portraits. And so I'm like just thinking to myself how funny it is. Here are these books with Native American portraits, and here's the shaman standing right next to him. Right? Like, oh, this is like a real life person. And then he pulled me aside, and he pulled me over to the stairs, and he points, and he goes, "That thing that blew through," and he kind of hushed his voice. He goes, "That wasn't wind. That was a thing. And that thing is attached to your uncle. And he's sitting right here. It's a dark creature. It's a man, a strange man with a hat. And he is evil, and I'm to be very careful." And then he was pulled back into the drinking, and I was left standing there looking at the stairs going like, "Oh my God, should I even like go on the stairs?"
Like, uh-oh.
Like, does it move, or what? I didn't get any more clarification from the shaman other than that. So,
did you tell Ingo?
No, I did not tell Ingo because I didn't really know how to take it. I was probably in my mid-20s, and I don't really know how I conceptualize all these things at 3:57. But
Well,
I
it'd
didn't.
be a
It
little
didn't.
intimidating. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, I have this information. I don't know if it's real, if it's true, and it scared me, and I'll just keep my mouth shut.
Yeah. So I just kind of kept that story, and I think I told a few people occasionally that story. And then recently, I was telling someone the story, and they go, "Oh, this man in a hat is a real thing. It's a very evil entity." I was like, "Oh my god."
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Oh my god. Oh my gosh. This is like a real. Okay, this is a real thing. So that's just something I learned recently. But the second thing is, okay, well, I became very interested in like wanting to see a pictograph because I had seen this in my mind and I drew it in the shaman. So I went in the Southwest, and I won't say where, and I'm kind of changing a little bit of the particulars of the story just to kind of protect the location and also the individuals I was with, and just know there's a little bit of changing. But in the Southwest, wanted to see a pictograph, found a location where there were pictographs, but you have to go into a state park and you have to drive. We had an SUV, and they say it's a primitive road, and that's really like giving it a lot of credit because it's dirt and scrub brush and ruts and just large holes, and it's only wide enough for one vehicle, but it's expected that 2 lanes of traffic can travel on it. Incredibly dusty, and you can see for miles. It's just desert and scrub brush, and you know exactly who's behind you and who's in front of you because you can't go more than like 1 or 2 miles an hour because you're like constantly going up and down into holes and over rocks. So you're moving very slowly, and then you're very present about like who's around you and where you are. At least we were, because it's in the middle of nowhere. And if somebody's coming at you, you want to know so you can have time to prepare to like get out of the way. And so we get to where we think the trail is to go see this pictograph. We park, and they have left a big parking area. It's like a circle, and it's about, I would say, 50 yards in diameter. Huge circle where multiple cars can park. Not that there are multiple people, because we barely saw anyone. And keeping in mind, this is still, I have cell phone at this point, but we've lost cell service, so I'm trying to make sure, like, all right, who will we pass? If something happens, what would be the nearest way to somebody, right? So, like, there's an occasional camper van along the way, just so I kind of keeping track of what's going on. And we park, we're trying to get our bearings, and all of a sudden, this car just comes out of nowhere, kind of like crests a little tiny hill to where this little parking area is. And everybody looks at each other like, where did they come from? Because they weren't behind us. We knew exactly who was in front of us. Where did they come from? We're kind of in the desert, so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, are we like in a drug cartel area? Are we in a human trafficking area? Like, did they just come out of a side area? That was my thought. And so I'm really trying to focus on what are they going to do and who are they? And okay, maybe they're another person, we just didn't see them. They're going to go hiking like we are. They come and they literally parked right behind our vehicle within like 2 feet of our vehicle. I'm like, we're going to
die. Okay, full throttle. Yeah, I'm going to die. All right, that's it.
We're going to die. Like who parks 2 feet behind your vehicle in an otherwise 50-yard open stance of places?
Yeah, that's odd. Odd, yeah.
Right. Okay, so now I'm like, this is not good. And this guy gets out. He's like really tall, and he's like really well built. And it's actually a nice car. So there's a part of me like, okay, well maybe they're not going to die. I don't know. So you have to understand, this is what's going through my mind. This person's parked really close to us. We're in the middle of nowhere. They're a really big person, and I'm half expecting him to like just reach in and pull out a gun. I'm trying to just figure out, are we going to die? Who is this person? What is their motive? Why are they here with us? And he says to me, is this the pictograph trail? I'm like, I don't know. We haven't sorted that out. It's not like this whole area is well marked enough to know which trail we've come along. It's just the first trail we've seen. So we haven't even investigated, like, are we on the right trail or not? So I tell him, I don't know. As I'm trying to sort out, like, are we going to be trafficked? Are we going to be murdered? Are we going to be raped? You know, what is all of this? What are his intentions? That's really where my mind is. My mind starts to record details that I'm not really making sense of. And I start to come into that moment. Wait a minute. He's got a hat on. It's like one of those floppy hats that like maybe you might wear when you're hiking or the baseball coaches wear. But his sunglasses are like from the 80s and his shirt and clothes are from the 90s. And he's got these army boots that are like from the 50s or 60s. Like he was dressed, but it wasn't coordinated and it certainly wasn't from the same decade. And then, I'm trying to record details about like the car. Well, there's no dust on his car. And come to think of it, there was no dust when he crested the little hill, like, and there's dust flying everywhere. And he goes running off to where the trailhead is. And when he's running, no dust is coming up. And again, and then I notice that it's like a waddle, like he's waddling. And he's like a fit, tall guy. And I'm like, it's just not adding up to me. And he comes running back and he actually has me a piece of paper, the trail guide. He hands it to me and he goes, go here. Here's where the pictograph is. So he's handed me something. I'm like, okay. And then he just proceeds to jump right back into his car. And as he's doing so, he's like, oh, so much more to see. And then he drives back the way he came. Well, like the road kept going, so there's other trails. What more to see is there? You're seeing everything there is to see. Like what? And he leaves and there's no dust. And I'm like, okay. All right, what's at where he pointed us to? Is that like where the trap is?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm like, okay, well, let's just go. We're here. Let's just do it. We walk along and we're identifying everything that's sort of like on this trail. And it just feels like the further we get, the more we're watched until we finally get to a large, it's two boulders where the pictograph is. And it's that figure that I saw with shaman, like a healer, a stick figure with their arms raised, right?
Yeah.
But their arms are raised to another figure that looks pretty ominous, and it has 6 toes. And it's like it's holding it up or praying to it or something. And instantly I feel like that is a no trespassing sign, right? That's what comes to my mind.
Mm-hmm. And
my friends like touch the boulder and they're like, it's vibrating. I'm like, get your effing hands off the boulder, right? And this, as soon as I say that, I feel this incredible darkness, this dread. And I'm like, we need to leave now is the feeling. And as we're walking back, maybe like we come like a quarter of the way back, another wind like thing, it's not strong, just kind of a gentle thing, goes pushing back past us. And I say, I'm really afraid of the car. I'm like afraid that something happened to the tires or somebody messed with the engine. I'm like, I had this feeling of dread about the vehicle, SUV. Like,
it cut off. Okay. I am not recording anything. It's now silent. So, the feeling of dread. Wow. All right. I'm going to call you back because I got nothing on this end.
hello.
Well, we lost you at the feeling of dread. So that's, kind of a perfect place to cut out. You're not supposed to be talking about this, Chicklet. Okay. That's what's going on here. So
yeah, 100%. So yeah, that feeling of dread. We go over we finally get close enough. I can see the vehicle. The SUV's tires have not been slashed. I can see. Okay, all right, that's good. I don't really even know what that feeling was about. Maybe I'm just freaked out about what happened over at the pictograph. And so we get to the vehicle, and on the passenger side, which is the side I was on, there is in dust prints right under the door handle 6 little fingers.
Wow. Okay.
That was freaky.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And not only that, see, what I get is the scent you sent me an email, and I'll share this image, this pictograph. The email that you gave me the image on is the human figure, and that to me is protection, huge protection, and you have protection around you. For whatever reason, that curiosity puts you in a super vulnerable place, but you're able to at least corroborate the information that you had. And I think that when he showed up, you wouldn't have found it. And the guy who showed up with no dust and all that, that's the good guy. Honestly, even though he had a hat, he's a good guy. Yeah. He was making sure you were okay.
Yeah, and making sure we didn't go any further. Because if we had gone further along the road to the other trails, we would have crossed that barrier.
Yeah.
And he was like, go here, but go no further. And actually, one of the people I was with can actually see beings. And they told me afterwards, when I said, get your hands off that rock, they said there was actually thousands of these beings. And what that was like a barrier. Keeping them in, it was thousands of them. And once I said that, they all turned their attention to me, which is probably when that feeling of overwhelming, of dread, right? Overwhelming, like, we need to leave, we need to now happen. And then they said there was actually that figure was a shaman who had created that barrier, who had sacrificed himself for the barrier. So when we were walking, that light breeze that passes was actually the shaman. They said that there was some really strong being in there that can't get past the barrier, but they could manipulate elements. That shaman and these elements had a battle over at our SUV, which is probably when I was like, we need something fun with the SUV when I said that. Ended in with that, they still touched the left the dust on there, and there was a battle, and so that whole thing, I don't know. I'm very curious about what happened to Cameron Robbins. He's the kid that jumped off the boat in the Bahamas, the high school kid that disappeared. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's a great thing on social media because he was on a party boat with his high school and a number of other high schools celebrating after they graduated. And they say on a dare he jumped in. It was the middle of the night, and then he just disappeared. And there's only been one video, and it was put on Snapchat, and it's highly edited. But people have been taking it and slowing it down and doing like just in one frame by one frame, and you can see that he's attacked by sharks, and nobody's talking about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's always just captivated me. I love when people kind of like investigate things to figure out what's going on. So sort of in the comments of one of these analysts, they talk about the missing 411, which I hadn't really heard about, but I did once I learned that, it deals with like people disappearing in national parks under strange circumstances. Like, okay, well, I've not read the books, but I'll try to figure out how I can watch the film, which I ultimately do. And as I'm watching the film, these kids, it talks about these kids disappearing in national parks, and I see that in some of the cases they find the remains in these boulder fields, which is exactly like what was behind that pictograph in the desert, which is the field of boulders. There's something about boulder fields and these beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not that I think that all of the cases on the missing 411 are related to these beings, and in fact, I did a lot of research and I found there's probably a lot of human reasons and animal reasons these people go missing. People with nefarious agendas probably kick people. So if you research these stories, you can find there probably more times than not a very reasonable and rational explanation for that. But there might be the one or two, right? So it's like not everything is one way or the other. The world is very technicolor. It's not black and white, but there could be, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I go, okay, well, what's up with these boulders? And I find this guy on YouTube who's going to the Southwest petroglyphs, right, the carvings. And he's saying how the indigenous, these ancient people from 2,000 years ago were marking, hey, here's a portal. Like there's a pictograph in Dinosaur National Park, which shows you like these two circles with these strange beings on, either side with an animal coming out of one upside down. Like to me, that's definitely a portal. They're like warning, like, don't go there. And I'm like, I think these indigenous ancient peoples knew about this. were, very much in the realm of contacting the spirit world or their ancestors, and bumped up against this quite frequently and experienced probably dangerous situations and tried to leave us warning signs. That led me to looking at pictographs from South Africa, the ones that you kind of mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's exactly that thing. They're warning us, and not only they're saying that, but they're saying, one of them is a being that's half in and half out of a rock. I'm like, of course. They knew it, and they left us warnings, and we're oblivious.
Remote viewing, aliens, psychic abilities, ghosts. Ingo has so much information available on the website, thanks to Elly, all that and more. ingoswann.com. A quick break. We're not real fluent in the unseen, and that's where we have to get our game on. And that, I think, is what Ingo is trying to say in all of the stuff he left behind is this is the direction we're going as we evolve, is to become more conscious and more aware of our psychic abilities.
Yes, and he would say it's the only weapon that we have. He'd say these things are dangerous, and they know that the only weapon we have is the control over our, he said telepathy, but I would say our abilities. I feel like that we're not understanding the true extent of how powerful we really are and what that could mean to these beings.
There's a lot going on with this. For one thing, if you have any kind of experience with ghosts or with people who are deceased or other entities, then there's a lot to be said for having some kind of a frame of reference, knowing that this paranormal, occult, unseen world has already been packaged and sold, and people have tried to tell you and warn you these things are real and be careful. And even getting into the psychedelics now, like Alex Gray there's a video I saw of him recently dealing with aliens and interdimensionals. And there are other people Terence McKenna, talking about using ayahuasca or DMT and encountering the plant beings. There's so many realms, so many dimensions to this, that when you're a newbie and going in, well, I'm going to talk to whoever I can get, an ET from the sky, and having no idea, well, you might not get into that level. You get into a whole different arena with your talking, and some people like to say demons. I just say non-corporeals or unknown, because I don't even think we can qualify what some of these entities are because we aren't that educated about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm referring back to, and I think my interactions they're pretty dark and they're with ill intent. And that's what Ingo came across. And as I said sort of earlier, the misguided sense, oh, they're sweet, they're innocent. And then, oh my gosh, for the rest of his life.
And they turn on you, gremlins.
Right?
Yeah.
But they could easily present themselves in a way. And so I guess my understanding of all of this and my thought on this is, do your research. Not everything is as it seems. I mean, there's lies within truths and truths within lies. I mean, look, information can be erased, information can be supplanted. I mean, look what AI can do with images and videos and voice. And how do we know what's real or not real? I think Ingo, he taught me is, gather your data. Do your research, look at the information. I mean, it was all about exploring, but from a knowledge perspective.
Well, I think also you have to know your own intent. And one of the things I liked about the page that you posted on there at ingoswann.com, the Non-Human-Entities page, the entities have a serious type of telepathy capable of something dire, a type that he names as telepathy plus. One which is being beyond a channel for information exchange, one capable of mind control and scrambling human consciousness. In other words, once you enter that room, then they have control of you because you're a newbie and you don't understand that you have to go slow and get an assessment of this before you dive in. And that's when he was doing the remote viewing of Mars or the moon. And the thing I thought was really compelling was they sent him there. He was fresh, had no information, didn't know that he needed to protect himself, because when the entities saw him and homed in on him, he's like, oh my gosh, whoops. He was immediately given that a little signal that said, watch out, we see you.
Yeah. And I also posted on the website this article from the 90s, which is William Belk, who was a big funder of Tuhark and the Council of Nine. But he's saying, hey, these things have been running, the U.S. government's known about these things for a while, and their agenda is to run the planet. And there's ill intent involved with this. So however they're coming, they could be close. You know, I kind of heard a neat analogy, like these beings, like they probably see us like we see ants, right? They're there, they annoy us, we step on them, but mostly they're going about their business, we're going about our business. But if they see something like I imagine there are those entities that if they see a human get in trouble would intervene. Almost like if you saw somebody crossing the street and about to be hit by a car, most likely, I mean, these days it seems like people pull out their phones and just record it, but somebody might try to pull that person back. I don't think that they're doing it to, you know, their motives are probably pure, as though you would see somebody in danger and try to intervene.
Yeah, I think we have multiple influences. I mean, from my own channeling experiences, I have had some incredibly enlightening, helpful, and uplifting encounters. We are seen. Our intent is seen. And if you want to dabble into the dark stuff, well, then get what you're looking for. I watched an example I thought was Rosemary Ellen Guiley. And she started out with angels because I got one of the first decks that she had of her angel cards. I thought it was fantastic. But I tried to contact her toward the end of her life. Didn't know that was happening at the time, but right before she died. And she, by that time, had progressed to dealing with the jinn and some dark entities. And I'm like, oh my gosh, a complete flip-flop, because it had drawn her in and her attention. And I tell you, it's much easier to extricate yourself from angels than it is from the dark elements, because they really feed on our emotions and our, like that fear that you were experiencing. That's a magnet and it can save you, and it can also keep you invested, because some people consider fear as an aphrodisiac. It's like, I want to go see a scary movie. I want to be I like that fright feeling, and it's a high. And if you get obsessed with that high of being frightened, of scared, of being whatever, then you're in that element, and they have the upper hand, in my opinion.
Yeah, and to your point where you said that with Rosemary, there are groups out there selling this notion that you're going to be contacting, helpful beings and enlightened beings, and they'll give you great guidance. But in some respects, it's like a gateway drug, honestly. That's how I see it.
If you continue to use that as your only way of pumping up your ego, absolutely. And that can be, it's addictive. I've watched people go down this trail, and it's all of a sudden they're being told, and there was a show, Aliens. I can't remember. I used to watch this one, then they got canceled. Darn it. But they'd had to do, you are special. And that's it. And then you see all these things that make you see that you're special and you need to do this. And once they start telling you what to do, then it's like you've given away your power. And that's the whole thing. You don't do that. It's analyze, discern, understand, how does this benefit me? And, how am I progressing spiritually by falling under the guidance of something else that says that they are in charge? And that's really an easy way to figure out the direction. And it always comes back to you. You have self identity, and that's hugely important. I like the quote that you include on Ingo's page, that everything is interconnected. Nothing just happens. Everything to me is a test. What road are you going to go down? How far are you going to go with this? What will you learn as a result? And the bottom line is, the minute I decide somebody else has power over me and I allow them to have power over me, then I've given away my self-identity. I've handed it over. And I think that's what the shamans try to impart, is that if you're going to do this, be prepared. Do your homework. Don't go in absolutely, these other people or other beings are gods and they know better. It's like, you have the ability to discern, is this in my best interest? And then go from there. And they see that first. That's the whole thing. We're so vulnerable because we are seen. It's that our energy speaks volumes, and that's, I believe, where we have to improve our own abilities across the board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know people are looking for guidance or looking for answers, especially with disclosure, right? And they want to know the secret. So using, quote, remote viewing to access alien bases or alien technology, because they want to know, but don't know there's another side to that and what could happen to you when you are going there unprotected or unknowing or misunderstanding the situation and what's really happening. You have to understand also these entities are tricksters. Right? Even the ancient indigenous people said, hey, they're shapeshifters. They can come in and they look like one thing, but they're really another thing. And they were afraid of them. And I think they're afraid of them for a good reason.
I do too. And you have the Heyoka, you have the different, in the indigenous cultures, they speak about these kinds of beings. And some of it is just basically to get you to start thinking for yourself, start being accountable for your own actions. Once you become aware that that's the only way you have power is your personal accountability, then some of these things are no longer of interest because you know it's a game, it's a trick, it's a trap, it's intentional, it's a learning experience. And then it's like, oh, I don't have to fall into the boat of everybody else is doing it, so I will too.
Right, exactly. And people are doing this, and they're coming back with hitchhikers or what you might call an energy parasite too. And that, I think, needs to be talked about in this meeting. Like, you have to understand everything that could possibly happen to you and be prepared.
Some of the dealings that I've had with ghosts or paranormal, it wasn't about anything that the person was doing wrong. It was about being there and feeding on the energy and not judging the energy as good or bad. But for what we do with our emotions, it's like a bubble bath or a jacuzzi, depending on, if it's super angry, all that. Then you get these attachments who follow that source of fuel. And to say it's just as neutral as I can put it. There's no good, there's no bad. It's just the fuel that they are feeding off of. And so then when you have a lighter energy, you don't draw the negative element that's there just for the purpose of entertainment. And we are the entertainment source. So that was helpful to understand that our emotions create an energy source for other entities, non-human entities. And if you want to travel with a better crowd, clean up your stuff. And it doesn't mean bad things or challenges won't occur, because the minute you upgrade yourself, then you're in a different level of, okay, now you're expected to do it once again and get, a handle on this next phase and the next level. But it's really frustrating to see people so caught up in disclosure. Well, my God, that's happened centuries ago. Look at the art. Listen to the stories. Mm-hmm. This isn't something that just happened yesterday. And it may be that supposedly the first UFO that ever crashed was Roswell. No, that's the American storyline. You go to the research that the Russians have done, that they've done overseas in different societies have their own stories that involve the UFOs. And somehow we were all stuck on Roswell, the Aztec. There's other crashes that are well known, but we seem to have this storyline that is repeated over and over again, that this is when it first happened. And unfortunately, that's what disclosure is about. And it does not address the other element of encounters and firsthand experiences. Canada has a wonderful backlog, a library of those kinds of experiences as well. And they're not all pleasant. That's the radioactive stuff that they come in contact with, that some people die as a result. And that doesn't, just doesn't cover all the bases when you're talking about disclosure. It's very superficial.
Yeah, I mean, it is multifaceted, right? Didn't they say on their website, disclosure is a highly complicated situation. And it's not just one situation. There are multiple sides to disclosure. I don't know, at least since Roswell, right? You look at the U.S. Air Force programs. I mean, they were misinformation, disinformation.
That's a real education there.
Right?
I think
Right?
that's helpful to know that, for a long time they didn't want to talk about it. So how do you not talk about it? Well, you shame people, you harass them, you intimidate them, you exploit them, you pretend that they are totally cuckoo, and then you don't have to talk
Mm-hmm.
about it. So it's called, the whole thing was to create a diversion. And in that way, you could keep from talking about it. Well, now they can't keep from talking about it because they want more information. How do you get more information? You
Yeah.
get people to start talking again. So here we go. We're talking again. Ha ha ha.
Right. In a circle, right?
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
it's a complete circle. So there
Well,
you go.
with Ingo, though, let's get back into the entities, because this is something he experienced firsthand. And when you have an attachment, which the shaman pointed out and said, "Hey, look out! This is attached to him." How did he I guess combat? How did he deal with that? How did he address that?
Well, in his archives at University of West Georgia, he used a technique he learned in Scientology called self-auditing. He used his e-meter to assess where these entities were, where they were coming from, and their means of attack and their motives, and then trying to clear them off of him.
From what I read, it was his entire life. Once he was introduced, or they were introduced, they were connected, and that was something he had to deal with on a regular basis.
Oh yeah, I mean he talks about in Penetration having seen a UFO as a before he was a teenager, as a young person, and then of course in Stardust Highways we talk about his angel encounter. I think he was definitely traversing the psychic plane and experiencing these entities. And who's to say whatever research they were also doing at SRI or other research laboratories or the government was doing, that they weren't also trying to contact these entities. And that's where this came from. I mean, 357 had its share of experiences. Certainly experienced that. I know when you've spoken to Paula Roberts, I mean, the third floor needed a cleaning and not the housekeeping kind. Right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Hello, help me.
That's what brought Paula Roberts to our life. And despite that, I'm not certain that even works.
Just because, okay, this is like people who have antique stores. I have to be really careful because they have the items in the antique stores oftentimes will have an attachment depending on where it comes from, and you don't know that necessarily offhand. Some people do; they can see it. Other people feel it, but I can definitely speak to it from my own experience that even when you go into the antique store, sometimes the lights will flash, you'll get a sound, you'll get something that will fall down, you'll get a clue that there's activity there. And some of that activity is attached to articles. One of the women I know has a desk that other people told her this has an attachment. So she's made a living knowing that attachment to the desk was something that people were curious about. In the meantime, though, sometimes those attachments then start doing things in your own home. There was one person who had in the area I'm in, had an antique shop, started having issues with one of her kids. And the only thing was, every time they would clean something out and get rid of an item, well, then as an antique store, something else would come in. So it was a constant churn of these issues with items and paranormal activity. And then her daughter being in a place where she was receptive and vulnerable, it was better for them to get rid of the store. And that's real. That's something that people don't anticipate. And some people can block it out. But when children are more receptive and teenagers are vulnerable.
Absolutely. You know, and again, here's Ingo, who's had lifetime experiences.
Yeah.
Who still has these things and still dealing with these things.
What you have posted, though, the most recently with the page on non-human entities, that's something I waited to hear. I mean, yeah, I read Penetration, but some of this in his own writing and his research, and that was put out in other publications or a conversation with somebody else. It wasn't all compiled until you actually put it together here. And so it was so nice to see that because it just gave it more relevance and more importance. And it's about time. How's that?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. You know, I hope that, you know, my hope is that people will start to do their research and understand the complexity. It's really, it's in some ways it can be a spider web, right? It can trap you. So really kind of just step back and take a breath and go, okay, lean into something that is of a knowledge base instead of an emotion base, and have a broader spectrum, because I don't think that's the offset is not being offered. And so it would be great if that conversation, so we're kind of in this world now where if we don't agree with another person, we just kind of block them or we stop that conversation. And I feel there is great merit to debate, to conversations where there are conflicting ideologies or conflicting ideas, because that's where you can start to get down to something that's more real, when you can share ideas and listen to other ideas and listen to experiences. That was the great thing that Ingo taught me, is however people may come to you, they have experiences. I may not have a reality for that experience, but they have a reality of that experience. And I can listen to it. I may not agree with it, but I can validate that that person experienced it or has that reality, and listen to that.
Yeah. Yeah. The book Penetration, when he talks about some of the other, like the Men in Black and the other Mr. Axelrod, everybody wanted to know Axelrod. Who is Axelrod? And it turns out it's multiples.
It's multiple people. And I can tell because of his Mars chapter, right, that we put into this special edition updated of Penetration, that Penetration was actually going to be a far more complex book. So if you look at the three parts, right, his adventures and escapades of various natures with Axelrod and the twins is the first part. Then there's the hollow moon theory and the reasons for the lunar lights and the phenomena that happened on the moon. It's the second part. And the third part is why we need to develop telepathy, because we need to protect ourselves. Right? So it's three very different parts. And then you have this Mars chapter. So I actually think it was going to be a far more complex book. And when you look at kind of the Axelrods in this situation, okay, clearly one is interdimensional, right? And his twins are dead ringers for Keel's Men in Black. I mean, you can do a comparison, and they're pretty much the way Keel describes them, and the way Ingo describes the twins are pretty much alike. So you could pretty much say, okay, maybe they're like quasi-dimensional. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they're violent androids, but they're dealing in the realm of the interdimensional. And I say it like when he talks about green, I think he's going interdimensional. He's dealing with interdimensional situations. That's one group. And then there's the group with the UFOs. There's another group that's dealing with the woman in the supermarket. So you're dealing with some real people. You're dealing with some interdimensional people, and you're dealing with, hey, there's interdimensional beings. There's things up on the moon. You saw structures on the moon. There's something going on up there. There was something on Mars. There were ancient civilizations on Mars. Many, many remote viewers were tasked with looking at Mars and saw structures and evidence of a civilization from a long time ago there. Maybe it's quite possible that, the hollow moon theory is where we created and put on this earth. I mean, somebody had to put, if it's an artificial satellite, somebody had to put it there. So who put it there? Somebody. If that is true, somebody put it there. So there's that story. What's going on with Mars? What happened to the people on Mars? Did they evacuate Earth? Did they evacuate Mars? Did they end up on Earth? Who are these interdimensional beings? And if we have material that is not of this world, whether it comes from another dimension or interstellarly, clearly we have some of that material, because there is this, all of a sudden the whole 0-point energy and the quantum realm and quantum mechanics and anti-gravity things that are going on. So I think he was going to explore all those topics. And then why we need to develop our own abilities and be thinking beings and protect ourselves.
Yeah, basically it's just expanding your awareness and increasing your knowledge. So it isn't anything spooky. It's all about just becoming more intelligent about these types of situations and actually the existence of others beyond us, that we're going to have to figure out how to have a language to hopefully cross the bridge the divide, maybe is a better way of saying that.
Yeah, bridge the divide. But, each person is a special unit, capable of so much more, capable of reaching a higher level of being. And, ultimately, I think that was his book, Resurrecting the Mysterious, right? It was like coming from a base level to becoming a very highly operating individual.
It's a labor of love for some people, and for other people, it's excruciating. It's like, I just want to do the math. I just want to do that. That'll be easy. That's all linear, and it's fine. Well, for the most part, till you get to quantums. Anyway, what I also find interesting, and now these issues are being talked about from the science realm and from other people who are a lot more astute and able to actually do math. Bernardo Kastrup is one of them. Rupert Sheldrake. There was a conversation recently talking about how to get beyond materialism, and that there are signs that we have had, and we can't disprove it, other civilizations prior to ours, and maybe they weren't human. So there we come back to, there's a whole lot more going on here than we know or that we have in our history, that it would be helpful for us to connect some other dots to be able to have a better appreciation and understanding of these interdimensionals, these non-human intelligences, and going forward, not to expect everything to have been spelled out. There are going to be some missing pages in our history, in our knowledge. And as long as we know that, I think we're better aware or more capable of appreciating that we have a lot of room to grow.
Oh, that is a beautiful way to say it.
Oh, okay, thank you. A+, right?
A+.
Elly, is there anything, more books, more works coming out?
Honestly, right now, my goal is just really to start the conversation about what's happening and try to be that voice that's saying, hey, I'm not for, against your beliefs. I am just for or against learning about what's going on. Sometimes I think, there are those individuals that start on the right track and then, they go over, like you experienced, right, with Rosemary, right? And you have to understand, what are their motives too? So always kind of being a thinking person for yourself is, I find, a very valuable.
It would be easy to say somebody's doing it wrong, and especially if it has an outcome that we would consider tragic or in some way horrific. But we're all here for our own purpose, and in this, we are learning. So even if the ETs, the aliens, the interdimensionals have a really tough lesson for us to swallow, that's how we go forward, because we are evolving. And for me, this is one lifetime. I don't know where I'm going to be, what I'm going to do. I do know in my own belief and awareness, this goes on beyond the physical. So what I can learn here, I'm going to take forward. Of course, I may change my mind once I get beyond, but for now, it's a game plan of learning as much as I can and allowing that other people have some things to teach me as well. Rosemary was one of the people I learned from with her angel cards. I love them, and that absolutely learned a lot. Also learned from her other experiences that maybe I would not want to go down that road. But at the same time, I think she performed a necessary service to say, look, this is out here, be aware. And that I appreciate.
Yeah, there you go. Again, A+.
Okay. The links are in the description for the show. Elly Flippen is Ingo's niece, and ingoswann.com. Content incredible. So thank you, Elly.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to really discuss this and start the conversation.
Ingo's website, ingoswann.com. And again, Elly Flippen manages the estate of Ingo Swann. Check it out. Documentary about Ingo is in the works. Thanks for listening.